Well, I mean, for 30 seconds. Andrea, I moved you to the end because Will came a little earlier, so now Andrew's the one.
Okay.
Sorry.
Musical chairs, no
Take a
problem.
sip of your water.
No.
Good.
Somebody else, that would not go well.
I was an extrovert.
30-second interval.
Tom, 30
Yeah,
seconds.
you are an extrovert.
You came out with the other
2-minute response to that question, and then
you know how I operate. 30 seconds.
sure.
As time allows, questions.
Sounds good. And then there will be a closing at the end.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah, let's give it let's go.
Seems like
Yep.
Hi.
Okay, I did Chris tonight. How you doing?
I got it.
Are you in Burnsville or are you good?
You know, I live in
Okay. All right. So you live in the
Okay, we're going to give it till 3:05 and then we'll get going.
Nice to meet you.
I think you're sitting in the mirror seat.
Yeah. What's that? Yeah. Must be a heck of a traffic jam up there. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Burnsville Chambers 2014 State Rep and Senate Candidates Forum. My name is Tom Taylor. State Representatives Forum. My name is Tom Taylor. I'm chair of the Chamber's Public Policy Committee. I would also like to welcome everyone that's here and those that are watching on BCTV. This will be recorded and replayed several times on our local cable access channel. We'd also like to extend a thank you to Dakota Electric for sponsoring this forum. They've done this before. They're wonderful about it, great corporate citizens. We appreciate what you're doing for us. And finally, I'd like to thank the candidates that are here, and we'll introduce them in just a moment. I do want to mention that we're waiting on Roz Peterson and Sandra Mason, who are just running a little bit late. The process for today's forum will be the same as it's been in the past. Each of our candidates are going to be allowed 30 seconds to introduce themselves. Then each candidate is going to be given a question, and it's going to move in a sequence over as to who starts. And you're going to have 2 minutes to answer that question. Chris may interject with a follow-up question on that to get clarity. If time provides, there'll be questions from the audience. And after we're all done, you'll each be given an opportunity to provide a closing statement. So those in the audience, if you have a question and you want to have it asked, as time allows, we'll do that. There's some forms in the back. Our fellow Public Policy Committee member, Jim Camarado, is walking around. He'll be able to get the sheets for you. As you got them, it's right there. And as you get them, bring them up, and we'll look at the relevance and time allowing getting them to come in there. So at this time, I want to introduce our moderator, Public Policy member Chris Andruska. And as Tom said, hopefully Roz and Sandra will be here shortly so we can have all 6 candidates for state rep. Tom's going to have the time key right in front of you. You have 2 minutes on questions, 30-second introductions. Let's make the introductions nice and quick so we can get right to questions, and we'll start with Dan Kimmel.
Hi, I'm Dan Kimmel. I'm the DFL endorsed candidate for state representative in 56A. That's Savage and the west part of Burnsville. Thank you, Burnsville Chamber of Commerce, for hosting this event on this 13th anniversary of the 9/11 tragedy. Jane and I bought our house in Burnsville 16 years ago. We enrolled our 3 daughters in Hidden Valley and Eagle Ridge. All 3 have graduated from Burnsville High. I now have 2 grandkids. Lillian, our granddaughter, spends a lot of time at our house. I was wondering what the workforce is going to be like 16 years from now when Lillian enters the workforce. What Minnesota and the world is going to be like 20 years from now when those kids enter the workforce. that inspired me to get into this race. I'm delighted to be here and to speak with you about these issues.
Chris, I think we're gonna have to give them each a minute.
Fair enough, Dan, you want more time?
That's-
Or did he go to a minute?
We're good.
Right.
I'm setting the bar, I think.
Go ahead, Drew.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to the Burnsville Chamber of Commerce for hosting us here today. My name's Drew Christensen. I'm a lifelong resident of Burnsville and Savage, and I'm running for state representative because I believe in you. I believe in Minnesotans. I believe Minnesota and our economy functions best when government gets out of the way and allows you, as Minnesotans, to drive our economy and create jobs and create prosperity for Minnesota.
Will?
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks to the Burnsville Chamber for hosting us today. I really appreciate having a chance to come and discuss these issues. My name is Will Morgan. I am the current state representative. I'm in my third non-consecutive term. I represent all of southern Burnsville, this part of central Burnsville, and the northwestern corner of Lakeville. I have a wife, Denise. She's a teacher just like I am. I've been teaching at Burnsville High School for the last 23 years. This is my 24th year. And we have 3 children who go to school in the school district. Well, the youngest doesn't yet, but he will soon. I'm very proud of the work that we've done and the progress we've made in Minnesota over the last 2 years, particularly compared to the previous 2 years when we saw the legislature proposing cuts to our local schools, borrowing more money, skyrocketing tuition, and the longest government shutdown in history. These last 2 years, again, we've made tremendous progress. We've funded all-day kindergarten. We've paid back every penny that we owe our schools. We've made tax cuts for over 2 million Minnesotans, and we have a balanced budget for the first time in recent memory as far as the eye can see. I'm proud of what we've done, and I'm looking forward to making more progress in answering the questions today. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. I am Sandy Mason. I represent District 51A, which is most of western Egan and all of northern Burnsville. Again, this is my 3rd term and non-consecutive as well. And I have to tell you, it's always a privilege to represent the people of 51A. But this year, I am so proud of what the 2013-2014 legislature was able to accomplish. And I've heard on more than one occasion, this is probably the most productive legislature in over 20 years. We kept our promises. We did a balanced budget, which meant we didn't borrow from the tobacco fund. We didn't place undue stress on the school districts. And as a matter of fact, one of the major things that I'm proud of that we accomplished this past session is the fact that we did invest heavily in education.
Thanks, Sandy. Go ahead, Andrew.
And I'm Andrea Todd Harlan, and I am running for state representative in 51A. I am a resident of Egan. I live there with my husband and my 7-year-old son. I've been an epidemiologist for about 15 years, so I'm running as a citizen legislator. I have a job. I'm a wife. I'm a mom. I'm on the Parks Board of the City of Egan. And I spent most of my life in this district. I grew up in this district. And when I grew up, I knew that I felt that I had the opportunity to reach my highest potential. I'm concerned that those opportunities are disappearing for our kids and for our grandkids. So I'm running to ensure that those opportunities can be maintained.
So we have 6 topics that we'd like to start with, and you guys have all been given the questions. And we're going to start with transportation, and we'll start with Dan. Transportation funding has become a large issue over the last year, heck, over the last decade. And what are the biggest challenges that we face in transportation funding? Should bonding play a larger role as it relates to roads and bridges? Should we have a usage tax on, for example, semis that are driving on our roads? Should we have a gas tax increase? Should there be more efficiencies? Talk specifically about how you would handle transportation funding as it relates to the state budget.
We have a quickly decaying transportation system in this state. We have to protect the safety of our kids and our families, do whatever it takes, whatever we need to do to fund those issues. We can't have children killed when a bridge falls down. The state and community accepted the responsibility to provide a safe transportation system, and we have to do whatever it takes to make that happen. We have to keep the goods flowing to the farms or from the farms. We can't have a delivery system interrupted by a bridge down for 2 or 3 years while it's rebuilt. We in the metro area think of transportation as in terms of commuting, of movement of people. But in greater Minnesota, we think of transportation as movement of goods. Farmers moving goods to the market and producers moving their finished goods out. So we have to think of transportation in a broader context than just the movement of people. Transportation technology is changing really fast. The technology changes fast, but the infrastructure that's built lasts a lifetime. So we got to think about rails, bridges, pipelines, all sorts of communication structures. Transit systems are the wave of the future. We got to use rapid transit systems to move people, and bike systems, and walking lanes. So I ride the bus often. It's a great way to move people. We got to get out of that idea of the stigma of buses. So at the same time we're addressing, we have to address our current deficiencies as well as the transportation systems of the future.
Thanks, Dan. Go ahead, Drew.
Thanks, Chris. The biggest challenges facing our state are deteriorating roads and bridges. And the best place to start is for MnDOT to find efficiencies in their current budget. When we last raised the gas tax in 2008, MnDOT promised to find 15% in efficiencies to help fund roads and bridges in their current budget, and they have not fulfilled this promise. And we need to force MnDOT to fulfill this promise and to find efficiencies in their budget so that we're spending your tax dollars most efficiently. You're getting the most bang for your buck and getting good roads and bridges. We need an efficient and effective MnDOT and an efficient and effective government. We need to prioritize existing funding for roads and bridges. They do much more than move people. Roads and bridges are arteries of commerce. They move people and goods and services and fuel economic growth in Minnesota. Better roads means better jobs.
Thank you, Chris. I was in office in 2008 when we passed the last major transportation funding bill. I supported the position of the Chamber of Commerce that had been developed over time, worked with the counties and the cities all over the state to come together and pass a transportation bill that could have bipartisan support. I hope we can do that again, but it's going to take the work of a lot of people. The most difficult thing about passing a transportation bill is the regional divides. Greater Minnesota wants one thing. The core cities want another thing. The suburbs, the outer suburbs like here in Burnsville and Lakeville and Savage, we want something else. You can't have 3 different transportation bills. You've got to have a bill that everybody can agree to and people can get on board with. And that's going to take the legislative leadership, the governor sitting down with the chamber, labor leaders, the counties, representatives from the counties and the cities to find a bill that we can compromise on. We did it in 2008. I think we can do it again. It's going to be a priority for me, and I'll work hard towards working together to find that compromise that can get that done.
My turn. I am the Vice Chair of Transportation Policy. I also sit on Transportation Finance. So probably the biggest disappointment of this past session was the fact that we did not pass a comprehensive transportation bill. And I'm really excited. I think we will be able to do it next session. But again, as I'm walking and talking to people at the doors, I'm asking them for their support. You need to talk to every legislator. You need to talk to the governor, that you are willing to support this. The other day, a gentleman said, well, he doesn't want the gas tax raised. And I asked him why. He said, because then it goes into the general fund. And that's not true, folks. That's why I'm comfortable with raising the gas tax, because I know that money is dedicated for transportation. So that to me it's a starting point. In 2006, as Will said, when we did the 2008 bill, we wanted to do a 10-cent tax, but we couldn't. The best we could do was 5 cents. That still doesn't get us to where we need to be. We need to do other issues as well. And again, the same man that didn't want what the gas tax said, he would be willing to accept sales tax going towards transportation.
I think we can do better than just always passing a tax to pay for our roads. I think if we look at where our money is going in MnDOT, if we reduce our overhead and put our money into roads, we don't need to be constantly raising taxes on our taxpayers. And I also have been door knocking, and I like to ask people about what their thoughts are on transportation. And time again, I hear, well, you know, I see these trains that we spend billions on, and they're empty. How can we do better? So what I talk to them about is, imagine, as we have these plans where we're spending billions of dollars on fixed rails, on trains. And so I say to them, imagine if in 1988, we spent billions building out our telecommunications infrastructure. And then along in 1991 came this thing called the internet. And we just spent billions of dollars on an infrastructure system that was supposed to last us 25, 30, 40 years, and it just is gone in a minute. We need to make sure that our transportation systems are moving our people and our goods where we have population centers, where our workforce lives, and I think bus rapid transit and other options besides just the fixed rail, lower cost options need to be looked at.
Thank you. We're going to turn to healthcare, and we'll start with Will. Healthcare is obviously on everyone's mind as the federal healthcare bill starts rolling out to the states. Some states have opted to exchanges, some have opted out of offering exchanges. Minnesota actually had a pretty good system with MnCare in place. We have to acknowledge that the healthcare bill is law now, and as state legislators, you don't have the option to repeal Obamacare or the healthcare bill, and that's the reality that we live in. And so the answer cannot be we need to repeal the healthcare bill, because that's not within your power as a state legislator. The bill is law. You are state legislators. We have MnCare, which was a good program. We have the exchanges. What is the solution going forward to being more efficient, being more cost-conscious, and providing health care to Minnesotans? Go ahead, Will.
Thank you, Chris. Let's remember that there are some good things that we've seen happening in healthcare over the last year. Our uninsured rate dropped by over 40%. We now have more than 95% of Minnesotans who have health insurance, and I think that puts us second in the nation behind Massachusetts, which of course had Governor Romney's program 10 years ago. One of the reasons for that was that over 300,000 Minnesotans were able to purchase health care through MNsure, through the exchange that we developed as a state. And because we developed that exchange as a state, we were able to do it the Minnesota way. We folded MnCare into the MNsure exchange, as well as qualified health plans through the private market, and also Medicaid. Through MNsure, more than 300,000 Minnesotans have signed up for health care and are now added to the ranks of people who are actually insured in Minnesota, and that's a good thing. Another thing about MNsure is they're the lowest rates in the country, and that's a good thing. If we had neglected to do MNsure, if we had just let folks in Minnesota go into the federal exchange, which was the option, that was the other option, people would be paying more. People who had enrolled through the federal government's health exchange would have been paying more. So we've saved Minnesotans money by establishing MNsure. Now, were there some problems with the rollout and some technical issues and some privacy issues? Absolutely. And those issues have been addressed to some degree and need to continue to be addressed. So we need to look at what the problems are. We need to fix the problems. But what we cannot do is go back to the time when health insurance companies called all the shots. They could refuse to cover people because of a pre-existing condition. We don't need that. We can't go back to the time where they could cut you off of insurance as soon as you get fixed. That's not good for people. So we've got to continue to move forward, fix the problems, and make sure we have affordable coverage for everyone in Minnesota.
Okay, what I would like to do first is take issue with your question. Because, again, when I'm talking with people, healthcare is not coming up a whole lot. And what is coming up are the people that are really excited about it.
To be fair, though, healthcare is a huge cost burden on the state, so that's why it is an issue, even though the constituents might not say it's an issue. It's an issue indirectly into their pocketbooks, et cetera. So I think that's probably where the question is more geared towards.
Okay, and I appreciate that. But again, I cannot tell you how many good stories I hear about people that have health care now, and in some cases they are saving hundreds of dollars. So there's a lot of good things. Going back to the rollout, and we knew that there was a possibility that there was going to be some problems with technology, and unfortunately that did come through. But they have been working on it, and there's no doubt that that still needs to be addressed big time. But overall, the policy is good, and so we just need to be looking forward to making it a better place. And I do want to piggyback on one thing that Will said. With people having more health care, or better health care now, they're not going to the emergencies rooms, which cost us a lot of money. So there's a number of savings in what's been happening. So we just need to be looking forward. But that's the same with any legislation. Nothing starts out perfect.
So the dirty little secret with Obamacare in Minnesota is before the Medicare exchange, we were already in Minnesota doing a good job of insuring our underinsured and our uninsured. We were a top 3 state. And that's, as Will said, with Massachusetts being number 1, and they did have a individual mandate to have health insurance. So Minnesota was already doing what we needed to do to take care of the people who couldn't afford insurance or had a job and perhaps that job didn't offer them insurance. Having a healthcare background, as I said, I'm an epidemiologist. I've worked in healthcare for 15 years. This is a big topic for me. And there needs to be a conversation both on healthcare and health insurance. And the Democrats have badly mismanaged this topic with healthcare reform. There's a lot of things that we can do. There's things that we can do as far as taxes, eliminating costly mandates. We can eliminate some various taxes on individual or small group markets. We could champion health savings accounts to make sure that we have better price transparency. So when consumers are picking their providers, they know what it's going to cost. We can also allow small businesses to self-insure so that they enjoy the same financial benefits that large corporations do. So we need to be talking about health care and health insurance. And unfortunately, we've only been talking about health insurance, and there's nothing that we can see so far that tells us that this is reducing the cost of our health care, because people are seeing their premiums go up, and it is nothing that we can see that's telling us we're getting better results, better outcomes.
Thank you. And Roz, we'll have you answer the healthcare question, and then we'll circle back to the next question. Healthcare is a big issue. We're having a rollout of the federal healthcare bill. It is law as a state legislator. You can't repeal the federal healthcare bill. We had MinCare, which was a great program in Minnesota that insured a lot of folks that wouldn't be insured in other states. It's a concern to business on the cost side. The constituents might not have the same concerns, but businesses certainly have that concern. What is your approach to making it more efficient, working with the exchanges that have been set up, et cetera?
Thank you. Minnesota has been the epicenter of the lowest cost and highest quality healthcare system in the nation. And so we did a lot of things right, and I agree with Andrea. It was a lot in the healthcare system itself that we created those efficiencies. And since the enactment of MNsure, which is obviously Minnesota's version of Obamacare, we've seen a $160 million taxpayer website that has had many issues. It doesn't work properly. And now we're seeing that premiums are coming up as high as 49% increases to some individuals with 200% increases. So clearly, I believe that we're heading in the wrong direction. And I think that what healthcare providers are saying now is we don't want to go backwards, we want to go forwards to reduce those healthcare costs. So we need to incorporate the experts in the healthcare industry to help us find those solutions, and they weren't really a part of the process in the initial steps. So we need to include those people and to help fix the website and incorporate market-driven decisions to help reduce those costs.
Okay. 300,000 Minnesotans who didn't have coverage before now have it. That's a success. Don't see anything to remedy. If your coverage costs more, it's because you didn't really have coverage before. You're paying for something, some sort of stopgap. The coverage under MNsure ensures that you will not go broke if you get sick, because it eliminates lifetime maximums. The rollout of MNsure was a mess, for sure. I've been involved in IT a long time, over 40 years, and helping businesses and government agencies implement IT. And I could have told you it was going to be a mess, because the legislature passed the funding to do the development just 6 months before it had to roll out. It's going to take 2 years. It takes 2 years to do that kind of work. And it wasn't funded. MNsure gives small businesses a big leg up in recruiting talent. A small business through the exchange can get coverage for about the same price that a big self-funded corporation can. So that's just one of the ways the legislature has helped small business.
Thanks, Chris. You know, the problem with that 300,000 number that we're throwing out, new people that have received health insurance through MNsure, is that most of the people that now have health insurance through MNsure previously were covered under what Chris said, the Minnesota Care, which was a great program. Minnesota had a great system for health care. We covered people that were in need. We covered our most vulnerable citizens, and that was a good thing. So I think part of the problem here with throwing out this number that people that didn't have health insurance before and now do is that most of these people did have health insurance before. We did take care of them. The government did take care of them. But now we're just spending additional money to do it. By 2016, the MNsure website and infrastructure alone will have spent $330 million without spending a single dime on actual health care. I think that's a problem. I think we need to bring our system more in line with, like what Chris said, with Minnesota Care, with what we had before, and we need to fix MNsure. We need to fix Obamacare in Minnesota, and I think we need some oversight. In this last legislative session, that when all the problems with MNsure were coming out, Republicans over and over again wanted to talk about MNsure. They wanted to talk and provide some oversight to some of these IT problems and all of these problems that were going on in time and time again under DFL control. They were not allowed to talk about that. And I think that's why we need balance in St. Paul. We don't need one-party control where they can silence the opposition. We need oversight and we need balance in St. Paul.
Thank you. Does anybody know the number of that 300,000 that wasn't taken care of to the exchanges? Because it is a shift from government subsidy state program to private insurance within the exchanges. Does anybody know that number?
Not off the top of my head.
Speak into the mic, please.
Excuse me? Oh, I was just addressing the 300,000 number and how many of those folks were on the government subsidized state program and now are in the private exchange program, which is indirectly subsidized through tax credits and other means. But it is an issue that is brought up quite a bit. We're going to shift to tax policy now. We're going to start with Sandra. We have a fourth tier on the personal income tax rate now that makes us one of the top taxed individual states in the country, and a lot of the businesses at the chamber and the small businesses around the state are conduit entities and they get taxed individually, not at the corporate level. We also have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the country at 9.8%, which the corporations, the large corporations, feed those small businesses. So a lot of the small businesses do work for larger corporations. And so it can hinder larger corporations coming to the state, which also feeds small business growth. There's a projected surplus. Is corporate tax reform at the income tax level going to be a priority this session here coming up in the winter? Should it be an election issue? And what do you specify as reform that might attract businesses to the state in terms of tax reform and the high taxes that we can face as businesses?
Okay, and again, that is something that I've heard before, but looking at the surveys and most polls, Minnesota is doing quite well as a business environment, both within the Midwest and also at the national level. But there is no question that we still need to be doing more to help the businesses and keep the jobs here and also attract more businesses as well. And I think, and that's one of the reasons, for instance, where I think the investments in schools was so very important, because we want to ensure that we have a really good workforce. So that, I think, is a good that's a good use of taxpayers' money, is where we spend it on education so that we can have the workers. We also did a number of programs this past session to help small businesses, to also help them get in extra people to, how would I put it, maybe ensure that if they hired somebody that needed training, that they could get some help with that training. I think that's a good thing to do. But no question, I mean, we need to still be looking at tax reform, but to pick one thing out without balancing on something else is a little bit difficult. And I think we've tried a couple of things over the years, and we haven't done it in a comprehensive way. So I think we need to look forward to how we're going to, what we're going to, if we take from one place, where are we going to get the extra money from?
To me, if you can remember one thing about this question, this conversation, is that this affects Minnesota moms and dads. Minnesota moms and dads who operate their own small business and file their taxes as a pass-through through their business, and they're getting hit with this higher income tax property or income tax rate. Our commercial property taxes are, as Chris said, our corporate tax. We're hitting our businesses so hard in this state. Personal story, I have two very good friends who are moving out of the state in the last 3 months. I've got two close friends who are solid middle-class people. They're well-educated, they love Minnesota, they pay their taxes, and they have more professional opportunity outside of this state than they do here. And so they're leaving. And at door knocking this summer, I was on a street in Burnsville Precinct 9, and on one street I saw 2 for sale signs in the front yard, and I had said to them, you know, well, while I'm door knocking, I'm running for state representative. I don't know if you'll be here on election day, but wanted to introduce myself. And both of these families were moving because they could save for their retirement and afford to send their kids to college if they didn't live here. They simply couldn't afford to live here anymore. And so these things affect us all the way down. This isn't just businesses. This is about moms and dads too, and families being able to afford to live in Minnesota. And we need to empower our middle class. We need to keep our middle class. And this question is a direct result.
About 3% of the LLCs and sole proprietorships in the state report more than the $250,000 that puts them into that 4th tier. It's a pretty small group. S corps and sole proprietors and LLCs are required to use cash-based accounting. So that means they probably expense some of their capital expenditures. That moves, of course, that's a disadvantage. This is the only disadvantage I see here, is that it means that something they expensed last year is now taxed as income, where it might be depreciation in another instance. It's taxed as income in the current year. We'd like to help small businesses who are good corporate citizens, who pay taxes and pay their employees a living wage. Those that participate in the economy and donate time and money to community charities. Perhaps there's some sort of a tax credit for adding to your employee base. Perhaps there's some form of investment tax credit that could be used. I graduated from college in 1974, right into the wage and price freezes of the Nixon administration. As an economist, I've studied and lived through and observed all these lots of ways to address the situations. I think I can be the guy to work with small businesses to implement some form of relief.
I think it's very important that we can provide tax relief for our small businesses. And like Andrea said, for Minnesota moms and dads, this isn't just a dollars and figure type of thing. And these aren't just businesses. It hurts us to just think of them as businesses because so many of these things, it's pass-through income, it's moms and dads, it's our friends and neighbors that are having to leave this state because of our tax climate. I think there's a lot of different things that we could look at to address this problem and to relieve some of this tax burden. But I want to talk about 4 of them. One is freezing or reducing or eliminating the statewide property tax on commercial investment property. Another is subtracting a certain amount of active business income from taxation. Another is subtracting a certain amount of active capital gains income from taxation, or a max flat rate for active capital gains. Another is exclude building valuation increases due to new construction or refurbishing from the statewide property tax for 10 years. And I think what this would do is this would encourage people to invest in their businesses, to invest in their employees, and to invest in Minnesota, to create jobs, and to employ Minnesotans. That'll power our economy and and create prosperity here in our communities for our moms and dads, for our friends and neighbors.
Thank you, Chris. When your job is to balance a budget, you have to think very long and hard about both the revenue side and the expenditure side of the budget. I know I thought very long and hard about the things the state needs to do and how we were going to pay for those things. I'm sure my opponent thought very long and hard when she thought about and agreed to raise property taxes on the homeowners in the Lakeville School District to make sure that they could do something about class sizes. So you got to think long and hard about these things. What we did was we narrowly tailored a tax, fourth tier, 2 cents on the dollar on income over $250,000 a year for couples. That affected about 2% of income taxpayers. That affected about 4 or 5% of small business owners. Didn't like it, didn't want to do it. But let's look what we got for it. We got a structurally balanced budget. We got a balanced budget with surpluses as far as the eye can see. We are not leaving a mess for the next legislature to clean up like the last legislature left for us. We funded all-day kindergarten to help close the achievement gap. We froze tuition for higher education. Tuition has been skyrocketing lately. Student debt is out of control. Kids are having to go back and live with their parents. We've got to start doing something about that if we want our middle class to afford to go to college and be part of this economy. So we froze tuition for 2 years. We also provided 2 tax cuts to 2 million plus Minnesotans. Those are all good things. Those are all things that are going to help the economy. A more educated workforce, better chance to go to college, and tax cuts for the middle class. We can keep doing those things now because we are not looking at going back to a deficit. We have surpluses as far as the eye can see. We have stability in our budget for the first time in years. So that's what we got for the decisions we made. I think we did the right thing, even though it was a difficult thing. As far as incentives go, I was the chief author of the Northwest Quadrant Bill to help develop that part of Burnsville, and also the UTC bill, which tied incentives, tax incentives, to job creation, and it's working for UTC. We should do it some more.
Thank you. Minnesota has the 4th highest income tax in the nation, 4th worst business climate, 3rd highest corporate income tax rate, 2nd highest business property taxes, 6th highest income tax collected per capita, and 7th highest sales tax rates. I think we can all say that the business community, who represents 13% of the property valuation but pays 31% of the taxable share, is paying their fair share. But you know, policies like this do have impacts, and that's why Medtronic has left. Unlike my opponent, I asked our voters if they would like to help support our schools, and they did so because some of the things that happen at the state legislature is funding is not equitably distributed. And I think that a lot of time in our business policies, there's winners and losers that are chosen instead of leveling the playing field for all businesses. And by looking at taxes is one way to make it equitable for everyone across the board. So leveling the playing field, investing without looking for more government handouts, I think that that's another challenge that's been created with some of these other policies. Reducing regulatory barriers, promoting innovation, and aligning workforce demands are a better way to provide prosperity to all Minnesotans.
Thank you. And there was a lot of information just exchanged, was exchanged between you guys. And so I'm going to do one more follow-up question on this topic, and we're going to give them a minute, Tom, because you know, they might have more to say. A couple of things: the cash versus accrual issue for small businesses. There are plenty of accrual-based small businesses that hold a lot of inventory that show profit that is never distributed, and so they have a burden in paying that tax as a small business owner. And the small percentage that do dip over the 250 are some of the larger small businesses that employ quite a bit of Minnesotans. there was discussion about commercial property tax freezes and reductions. That money has to come elsewhere, so maybe talk about how you would fund the state budget in other areas if you did significantly cut commercial property taxes, because commercial property taxes are a significant revenue source for the state. And everybody talks about small business, but I still want to address the corporate tax rates. The large corporations pay among the highest rates in the country in Minnesota. It's a very small percentage of the state's collection budget, about 4%. But there's a perception when Medtronic takes off. I've been on some boards and some committees statewide that have tried to attract large businesses to the state, because large businesses, again, create jobs, they create small business commerce, et cetera. And it's getting, although we have a good business climate when it comes to training and smart people and such in Minnesota, the business tax climate at the large business level is still a difficult sell, and you kind of have to avoid it, and et cetera. So how are you going to fund other areas if you do cut areas that are a large portion of the collection process, like property taxes, commercial property taxes? And would you be willing to address the large corporations, burden, their tax burden, given that it's such a small collection process? And again, we can start with Sandy. You have about a minute. If you want to address anything that your opponent said, feel free to also.
Okay. One of the things, going back to the income tax, the pass-through taxes that we were talking about, I mean, it's just, maybe it's repeating what somebody said, but it's just a very small percentage of those people that are truly impacted by that. The 4%, again, we're talking about incredibly small numbers of people. So I guess I'm really reluctant to change that until we really have stability in Minnesota, and I think we know that businesses are doing much better right now. One of the things that I think we haven't talked about is perhaps the fact that we know that the businesses are doing well, we know that they're putting money in reserves, but I think the one thing we haven't talked about, and it doesn't look like we will, is the huge amounts of salaries that are being paid to the top executives, while the people, the middle and the lower echelons in these firms are not getting raises, etc. So that, to me, is something else that we need to talk about before we start changing some of these other taxes as well. We need to be able to have people that can make livable salaries. And we raised the minimum wage this year, and I did vote for that. And I think that's incredibly important. But again, that is not even if once it gets to $10.50, that's not a livable wage. You need to be making $12 to $15. So all of this is part of what we need to be talking about.
My opponent said the small number of people that are affected by the higher tax bracket because of the pass-through is such a small number that it shouldn't matter. I argue that everybody in the state should matter. We, as Rod said, should not be picking the winners and the losers. We shouldn't have a favorite. If you're a parent, you probably don't have a favorite child, and as your legislator, I would not have a favorite demographic group. Everybody needs to have opportunity. Everybody needs to be able to keep more of their hard-earned money, and we have to stop picking the winners and losers in this state.
Business taxes need to stabilize every now and then. We've just bounced through a big change in business taxes 2 years ago, and a year ago the legislature fixed some of the things that were done wrong. I think it's time to stabilize right now and let our business taxes stabilize for a while, and then we'll make some adjustments in a year or so.
I would disagree. I think we need to make adjustments now. Well, Dan would let it stabilize. We're seeing large employers, people that employ thousands of Minnesotans like Medtronic, leaving the state and leaving the country because of our tax climate. Additionally, like Andrea said, these, while it may be in the grand scheme of things, not that many people, every person matters. When I'm out door knocking, I spoke with a small business owner just the other day who employs a dozen people in Savage. He lives in Savage Precinct 7. And I talked to him, and he's thinking about leaving the state. He certainly knows that he's going to leave the state eventually to sell his business because he just can't afford to live here. And that hurts us. That hurts moms and dads. That hurts, he employs people. He employs 12 people that are moms and dads, friends and neighbors. And I think that's a problem. We need to create a better business climate that will allow him to stay in the state that he loves.
First of all, the Medtronic issue is a federal tax issue. It's a tax inversion issue. It's for federal tax purposes. And their shareholders are pretty upset because their shareholders are going to be paying a lot as a result of this corporate tax dodge to Ireland. So we'll see if it actually happens. But as far as the Medtronic CEO says, they're keeping the jobs here. Those people are going to stay here. They're going to be paying taxes here. They're going to be working here. I'm going to keep him at his word. I certainly think the governor had that in this conversation. Corporate reform, yeah, let's talk about that. I've always said that our corporate tax rate is too high. One of the problems is we've got so many loopholes and credits, and we got to figure out a way to get through that and make a more level playing field there. I'm willing to listen to the ideas. You know, Chris and Tom and others with the Burnsville Chamber, I've always been willing to sit down with you folks and listen to what you have to say. I don't always agree, but when I do, we work together and we get things done. So I'd be happy to do that. Forbes magazine, no bastion of progressive thought. No bastion of progressive thought. It says we are the 6th best business climate and the 3rd best state to earn a living. That's good. Can we do better? Absolutely. I'm going to work hard to make us do better. 6th best climate for business and the 3rd best state to earn a living. We're going in the right direction again, folks.
Thank you, Chris. I'm a commercial realtor, and I talk to businesses every day. And there's nothing like just talking to the real deal. And they're saying what Andrea's friends are saying. I'm talking about leaving the state. I'm not going to expand in Minnesota until the business climate improves here. And that's real. I don't need to go to Forbes. I don't need to go to some other survey. It's what I'm dealing with every day. And I do think it's important that we recognize that these types of policies do have an impact. Our government has to be just as competitive as our businesses. So let's look at what makes sense for them to stay here and to grow and provide jobs to these families instead of saying, you know what, we don't care if you leave. In 2012, we had heard rumblings that Medtronic was leaving, and we said, you need to do something about this. They're talking about leaving. And basically, we were told, we don't care.
Next question, the minimum wage. And the minimum wage increase was passed. And there are tiers. You have a small business exemption at $625,000 in sales, which when I talk to my clients and fellow business owners here at the state level and in Burnsville and Dakota and Scott County, their problem with that arbitrary number is $625,000 to one company or one industry might be quite large. $625,000 to a manufacturer in Bloomington is a relatively small number. Representative Mason did point out, and correctly, that there is an income inequality problem in this country and in general, and we have to address that. And so, is the minimum wage, the way to address that income inequality? Are there better options? We know the chamber is against increases in the minimum wage. That's no secret. But if you're against raising the minimum wage, what are your steps to reducing income inequality? Because it is a problem. And we're back to the beginning, and we're going to start with Drew, though. So the GOP side will start with the question this time. Go ahead, Drew.
Great, thanks, Chris. You know, I think we all believe, everybody in this room and everybody at this up here believes that Minnesotans should make a livable wage. We believe, we want everyone here to make a good wage and everyone to make a livable wage. I think we just disagree on how to do it. You look at Williston, North Dakota, where there is a booming economy because of oil exploration there, a booming economy. A starting worker at McDonald's makes $17 an hour in Williston, North Dakota. And that's not because of the minimum wage, that's because of a booming economy. So what we need to do to create livable wages and good wages in Minnesota is to improve our economy. And I unfortunately don't think the minimum wage is the best way to improve our economy. I think we need to help businesses so that they employ more people, so that wages can go up, so that overall a rising tide will lift all of our boats. And I don't think it's fair to folks that are making minimum wage, because I've talked to those people out door knocking. I've talked to people making minimum wage, and a lot of them have heard that they're going to lose their jobs because businesses can't afford to employ as many people when they have to pay them more. That's just simple math. And I don't think it's fair to people making minimum wage that they should have to lose their jobs so that we can make people feel good and feel like we're paying people more money.
Dan, go ahead.
In 12 out of the 13 states that raised their minimum wage at the beginning of 2014, employment was higher in the 5 months that followed the increase than it was in the 5 previous months. Research and experience consistently show that employers absorb the cost of higher minimums through reduced labor turnover, lower wages up the scale, and raising prices modestly and other adjustments. There's already a provision in the law that allows a training wage to below the minimum for high school kids that are in. In economic terms, increasing the minimum wage increases the money supply and the turnover rate, and that boosts the economy. Bankers know how that accelerator works, the multiplier effect. If you're running a business in a business model that requires you to send your people home in poverty, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You're asking the government to subsidize your bottom line by assisting your employees with food stamps and housing subsidies. You're asking your community to donate clothing and food and money to shelters, food banks, thrift stores. Let's all invest in Minnesota, pay your employees a living wage. But my competitors who don't pay that wage will have an advantage, you say. Well, that's why we have a minimum wage law. Okay? So as Paul Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better.
Will? Oh, no, Ross.
Yeah, we talked about this
Yeah.
before. Okay. First, I want to echo everything that Drew has pointed out. I think that there's some real truth to that. And our minimum wage of $5.25 or $6.15, it was below the federal minimum wage of $7.25. So I don't think there was any argument about raising the minimum wage. The difference was for how much. And the other, now it's going to be $9.50 by 2016, which is the 4th highest in the nation when it was passed. So all companies tend to pay this amount, though. I know there's some changes for small businesses, but as a small business owner in the drugstore, when we hired employees, we didn't, even though we could have qualified for that lower rate, you really have to be competitive with the marketplace and pay really what the lowest minimum wage you can. The highest minimum wage would be in this case. So otherwise people aren't even going to work for you. And now it's tied to an inflationary figure that can only be controlled by a bureaucrat. And I think that putting minimum wage on autopilot is a concern. The other concern I have is that most of the people that are at minimum wage are high school employees. They don't have the training behind them, and businesses have to put a lot of resources into that employee, and it would be more enjoyable, I think, as an employer to give that person continual bumps to raise up to a higher wage, because it's a little bit more rewarding when you can get a bump in there too. And that we lose that ability and the flexibility as a business owner when it's already predetermined for you. And then businesses also end up adjusting the way that they do business, like, for example, restaurants using iPads and firing those servers instead. So I think we have to look at the impact of how these policies affect the ultimate legislation.
Most of the people making minimum wage are not teenagers. Most of the people making the minimum wage are adults. A majority of the people making minimum wage are women. The majority of people making minimum wage are women. And women's economic security is families' economic security. Minimum wage people spend almost every dollar they make, and they spend it locally. And And that helps local economies, and that's good for business. If you go back to 1968 and look at the minimum wage then and move it forward to today's dollars, it would be about $10.50. So even 2 years from now, we'll be behind where it would be now if you had adjusted it for inflation. I think we took some very modest steps. I think there was a lot of conversation about this over the last 2 years. Businesses were involved, the resort owners up north, the restaurant owners are involved. And I think we took some very modest steps to improve the minimum wage. Now, I will say this. Historically, when you look at this, the minimum wage has been increased in a bipartisan way. The last time Minnesota raised its minimum wage, it was a Republican House and a Republican governor who passed it and signed it into law. I think that's a good thing. The last time the federal government raised its minimum wage, it was a Republican president who signed the bill into law. We have always done this over time, from time to time, raise the minimum wage, because we know not only is it good for local businesses to have these folks with more money to spend every week, but it's also good for there's fewer government expenditures on food stamps and housing subsidies and the other healthcare subsidies that we provide to people who are making poverty level wages. And the minimum wage is still a poverty level wage. So I'm proud of that. I think we did the right thing. I think it's moving forward. We're going to have to continue to take a look at things, and I think we're in a good position moving forward. Thank you.
And this is where we differ, is because I don't want my people in Minnesota, the people of Minnesota, I definitely don't want women just to get by. I want them to thrive. Even if we did have $15 an hour minimum wage, a Starbucks coffee costs $5. So I want them to thrive, and I want us to do things in our state that don't keep people at minimum wage jobs for an extended period of time their whole life. We want our Minnesotans to thrive. I think that there's no doubt that there was this conversation for minimum wage, increasing the minimum wage was overdue, as Ross said. We were below the federal limit. However, it was done rather hastily by the Democrats at the legislature. An example of this is the automatic escalator, whereas the minimum wage would go up with inflation. As you know, a lot of businesses, their revenue does not go up as inflation goes up. So this puts them in a tight corner. So when we talk about attracting talent, I was getting my hair cut the other day, and I asked my hairstylist, I said, why do you pay the person at the front counter? And he says, you know, if I want someone who I can really rely on and make sure that, you know, that they're good at their job and they're reliable, I really do need to pay about $10, $11 an hour. So now, what does this mean? When we're getting up to $10 an hour, when we're staring down $10 an hour with the automatic escalator, how much are our small businesses going to have to start paying people to attract the talent that they need to fit that specific job? Because every business is different, and this bill doesn't take that into account. Every business is different.
Again, my disclaimer that I always put with the minimum wage, this is not a living wage, it's just a starting wage. And again, if you go into many of our stores, these are not just high school kids that are holding these positions, and even when they are high school kids, many times the money that they are making is going to help their families. We just have too many families that are just struggling. We need to find a way within our society to provide decent wages for people. This is a starting wage. This is, all it is putting it up a little bit, but we need to be looking at how we can get more people to make a living wage, which goes back to the discussion of how are we paying people, and especially, we spend a lot of time talking about servers who, again, make minimum wage. Some of them, if they work in good restaurants, make very good money. But otherwise, it's not a lot of money. They're just barely struggling. And yet the figures are showing the businesses, many businesses, are doing very well, but the money is going to the people at the very top. So and at this point, I guess I find it really hard to understand how people can push those types of wages and have any types of ethics or morals. But this is not something that I think government can solve. This is where we as a community, where we as individuals need to figure out how we want our money spent If you're investing in a company, maybe go to the annual meeting and see what the top people are making, what are the people at the lower level making. And do you agree? And if not, this is where I think grassroots really is going to be coming into play.
Thank you.
If we want our society to just be successful.
I'm going to, and if the audience has questions, go ahead and fill out the questionnaire, and Jim will get me those slips. I'm going to combine the next two. I'm going to actually ask the fifth question, but I'm going to have a follow-up to the minimum wage, because I do think income inequality is a problem that needs to be addressed. And there was a little bit of dialogue about how to approach that. The next question talks about trained talent in the state and how can we train young adults and high schoolers and college kids better so they enter the workforce and earn more money. And I think the minimum wage issue and the income inequality issue kind of ties into this question. But if you could please answer the tip credit question too before you get into the how do we train folks, because tip credit is an issue the chamber has had a big concern over, because the restaurants really are concerned with paying minimum wage and the tips and then having the other burdens associated with that, payroll tax, workers' comp, etc. Also the transitional job issue. If it's a transitional job, if they work less than a certain number of hours a month, can we have different metrics? I mean, that's something that's been talked about.
Can we get a cue card for this, Chris?
You can. You've been doing this long enough, Willie. You know, you should be taking notes.
All right.
We're going to start with, we're back. Are we back to the front again? Where are we at? No, we're with Roz and Will. So talk about how can we train people so the income inequality in the state is not as, it continues to widen. And even in good times, as Representative Mason has said, much of that wealth has gone to the top, 1 or 2%. How can we train folks better to earn more money? And then on the tip credit, just real quick, a yes or no, and how the minimum wage relates to getting people into minimum wages.
Yeah, well, the challenge, am I supposed to go first, or is Drew? Okay, sorry, I'm not sure.
Yeah, Will, you're up. You're up, Will, because now it goes back to the, go ahead, start, Will.
Oh, you start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
You should start last time. No. You sure?
Yeah.
All right, just go. Go.
Okay. All right, I'll try to follow all of that. Income inequality, a lot of that happened, I think, because of the economic downturn, and unfortunately the people who had more money were able to recover, I think, from that economic downturn more so than people who were more or less in the middle class and more or less, us. And that's how the richer got richer, because they got to take advantage of the situation, and now we're on a road to, I think, a better economy, so we're trying to get out of the doldrums that we've experienced earlier. So, clearly growing the economies is one step. There was a lot of stuff. First, I also want to add that 72% of minimum wage workers are part-time and 31% do not have a high school degree. So maybe making sure that our students actually get their high school degree is one other step to make sure that they can start out with a higher paying job so that they have at least that credential underneath their feet. And we have to align our workforce educational system with the needs that are in the job market. Businesses can't find the workers that they need with the high paying jobs.
On the tip credit, for those of you who don't understand, the tip credit is a fancy way of saying, let's pay people who earn tips at their job less than the minimum wage. They do this in a lot of other states. In Minnesota, we haven't done it for over 30 years. And I think it's a good thing that we haven't done it over 30 years. I think there is no reason to pay people less than the minimum wage just because they earn tips. I think it's been a long-established tradition in Minnesota, and we ought to stick with that, so I would not support that. As far as getting people trained, we have done work this last session in K-12 on developing the world's best workforce. We are making sure that by 2027, when this year's kindergartens graduate high school, that we have a 100% graduation rate, that they're all ready to read by 3rd grade. We need to better align high school with college, and we need to better align college with the workforce. And that's going to take a lot of conversations and a lot more than 10 seconds to talk about. But that's what we need to do. We need to work together, the state, educational institutions, and businesses, to do those kinds of things and get people ready for the workforce.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I would consider a tip credit. There's industries where people operate on a very small profit margin. So when the hospitality industry was one of those industries who experiences profit margins that are narrower than others, we need to listen to the leaders in that industry so that they can maintain their businesses and employ Minnesota moms and dads, and so we can continue to have families that are working for us. As far as income inequality, I agree with Roz. I think education since the beginning of this country was your step up, was the way that you could attain more. We need to do more looking at apprenticeships, trades. Let's look at the fields that are in demand so that we can make sure that our high school students are exposed to a wide variety of professions and they can really find their path and choose the right one for them and maximize their opportunity to income.
Okay, thank you. The tip credit, I still have not supported, and as I said, the last time I was here at a town hall meeting, I asked people in the audience what they thought about that. When they're tipping, they think they're tipping the server. And the perception is, if we use the tip credit, that it's actually the owner or the managers are actually trying to take money away from their employees. That's the perception. And that's a tough thing to overcome there. I know there's some other states that do things differently that I think maybe we could look at. And I'm thinking Texas, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Texas has a couple of things that I think we might be able to look at. So, I mean, it's something that's open, but it's a very fine line. And the tip credit, as I said, it's only if you work in really good restaurants where these people make enough money to earn a good living. One of the things I did want to mention about, I'm done.
That was just a minute.
I would also be willing to look at the tip credit. I think we need to be smart about looking at how businesses work. Not all businesses are the same. Not all ways of compensating people for their work are the same. And I think like Andrea said, some businesses are very tight profit margins. So I do think that we should be smart about it and look at tip credits. And on education, I think I would agree. We need to make sure our kids are graduating from high school, and not only that they graduate from high school, but that high school diploma means something. The current legislative majority repealed the requirement that our high school students demonstrate proficiency in core academic skills of reading, writing, and math. And I think, just padding the stats so that we can say more kids are graduating from high school, and so that we can feel better that more kids are graduating from high school, it ought to mean something that kids are graduating from high school, because it doesn't matter if they graduate, they need to be prepared for college and the workforce.
Tips are a way for someone in that business to get their wage up to the living wage. The minimum wage is, as we say, not a living wage. All my kids have been in the hospitality business at one time or another, and I did a little bit of it too while I was in college. The minimum wage, of course, is not enough to pay to live on. You need the extra tips to make it, and I don't see any room for a tip credit in there. And the reason for the disparity in income, I think, is because a lot of our middle-tier jobs have shifted overseas in the last 20 years. And we're going to have to overcome that in a lot of different ways.
Thank you. One more question, and it pertains to the budget surplus. And there is a forecasted surplus. We're going to get a revised budget here sometime later this fall. What should we do with that surplus if there is in fact a surplus? And if there's a deficit, how do you handle that? We'll start with Andrea.
Well, I don't think I need 2 minutes. If there's a surplus, that's the taxpayers' money. We give it back to the taxpayers. I think we need to, going forward in situations where we have a surplus, we need to find out, is this a one-time surplus? Is this going to be an ongoing surplus? One-time surplus, we have to make sure that that money Does it, land into the politicians' hands where they have opportunities just to spend the surplus and build Senate office buildings for themselves? If it's an ongoing surplus, then that's just, it's clear, we're overtaxing our citizens, and we can give that money back to them. We need to focus on rolling back some of these massive tax increases that the DFL has put in place that has made Minnesota so uncompetitive. Deficits, this is a real possibility because the current majority has massively overspent. The proof is with our revenue shortfalls that we've seen over the last 7 months. We're spending ourselves into oblivion in this state. So when looking at surplus and deficit, you have to take a critical eye and always remember that you're serving the citizens of this state. This is their money. It is not yours.
Representative Mason.
If there is a surplus, first of all, over the last decade, most of the reserves have been empty. So I certainly would think we've spent a good portion of that filling in the reserves. The next thing is spending more on education. Again, our school districts have had a really tough time over the past decade, and while we did invest heavily in the last year or so, you're still seeing some districts going on for referendums. So that would be another place, because to me, investing in education means two things. We're helping our students be better able to find a job in a global economy. And again, it also shows businesses that we are serious about having a good workforce here. The other thing, I did want to go back to another question when you asked about how we could train people. I think we really need to be doing more with apprenticeships here, and maybe that might be something we might want to actually even think about helping fund in the early stages of that. And also, I had talked with one of our business owners recently as well that most of the kids in high school don't have an idea of what jobs are like, so it'd be nice to have programs that actually got our students into companies before they're actually graduating. And if we lose money, then again, we just have to go at that point look at what the priorities are. But again, MnDOT is 20 years behind in its projects, so it's really hard for me to listen to people saying we are overtaxing and we are overspending. 20 years. I mean, imagine you having a job where you know what's wrong now and you're going to wait 20 years to fix it. Folks, we do have the right priorities, and everything shows that Minnesota is doing well right now. I'm running because I'm so proud of what we've done the last 2 years, and I want to keep Minnesota moving forward. I want a Minnesota we can be proud of, and right now I think that is happening. Thank you.
Go ahead, Drew.
I don't think we have the right priorities right now. I don't think a Senate office building that costs tens of millions of dollars for politicians is a right use of our priorities. I think we should be using that money to spend on roads and bridges. That's more money. We're spending more money on the Senate office building than we're spending on roads and bridges this year, and I think that's a crime. As far as the surplus, I don't need 2 minutes to answer that question. I think we should give your money back to you.
Go ahead, Dan.
There's a budget surplus. Let's look at those falling down roads and bridges. There's obviously always something that we didn't allocate for that we could have done. Spend it on that, or put it in a rainy day fund for another legislature to appropriate. If there's a shortfall, we have to look at where we can cut, what government services we can do without. Back to the jobs issue. I was on a school board in Illinois before we moved here, and we had a training program where the students in a trades program built a house. Every 2 years, the school board would buy a lot, and we'd pour the foundation in there, and then the kids would take it over. They did all the design work, all the duct work, all the framing, all the way through. And that was a great program for kids. So we need to look at all the ways we can train kids. Even when I was in, and the trades, the unions were a big part of that building. But even if those trades that are coming up now, where there's not a union, there's professional people that will be really willing to help. Where I did my master's degree, all the profs were researchers at AT&T Bell Labs, which is right near there. Are you asking your employees to teach as well? So I'll work with business to try to facilitate the development of those kinds of programs.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The budget forecasts that have been coming out for the past several months have all been under the February forecast. And that is a concern in our fragile economy. I believe that a lot of steps that were taken in 2012 set us up for a more prosperous 2013. However, the last legislative session, we started to see our economy contract again. And our spending went up 15%, or $2.1 billion. So it would seem to me that we should have a surplus after all that spending. And if we continue to see these kind of surpluses moving forward, it only seems prudent that we should give these back to the taxpayers. And we need to look at all of our spending, prioritize those needs, and evaluate how we can continuously improve and to deliver the services that we need to provide for the people who best need it. You know, the needs do always exceed the resources, and that's why it's so important to eliminate government ineffectiveness and waste. And I'll agree with Drew, just like how the money was spent more on a building for themselves than it was spent on transportation for roads and bridges.
For the first time in recent memory, we have a structurally balanced budget. We have a surplus. We have surpluses as far as the eye can see. There are always small variations in revenue forecasts and spending forecasts, which we haven't heard about. That doesn't come out until November. We're going to have a surplus. We made sure of that in our responsible budget that we passed in 2011 and the supplemental that we passed in 2013 and the supplemental we passed in 2014. Still, regardless of the surplus, it's responsible to go through the budget line by line and look for programs that are not efficient, look for programs that are no longer serving the purpose that they were designed to serve, and get rid of them. Cut those things. We need to prioritize all the time, and I think we should be prioritizing on the future, continuing to develop the world's best workforce. We made some good investments in early education, which pay back the most of any investments we make as a state government. We've got to continue to focus there. We have not accounted for getting every child ready for kindergarten. We need to refocus in that direction. We froze tuition at higher ed for 2 years, and that was a good start, but we need to do more. The President of the U just came out with a budget that said, pending funding from the legislature, he'd like to continue the tuition freeze for 2 more years. I'd like to take a look at that proposal, but I think that if we can do that, that would be a great idea. We need to continue to take a bite out of student debt. Make sure college is affordable for everybody who works hard to get there. We should look at middle-class tax cuts. Absolutely. We've made great strides. More than 2 million Minnesotans got tax cuts in the last 2 years. We should continue to see if we can do that and grow this economy from the middle out. Those are the things that I would focus on. Greater efficiencies and investing in what really matters, kids and the middle class.
Chris, we're up against our deadline here, so I don't think we're going to have time for audience questions.
So I think what we'll do, one of the audience questions talks about your personal experiences, your education, et cetera, as to how that would relate to you being a successful legislature. So we'll do 1 minute closing remarks, and maybe you can tie that in to those remarks and just talk about your own areas of talents and education and life experiences as we close this forum. So Dan, we'll start with you. Okay. And we'll go 1 minute for each of you.
The government is us. We are the government. The purpose of these elections is to have a legislature that reflects the community. I think my stance and my issues reflect the position and majority of the people in Savage and West Burnsville. We need to be looking long into the future. And as we do that, it's going to be experience and wisdom gained from experience that helps make these decisions possible. Look at my granddaughter Lillian and wonder what Minnesota is going to be like 20 years from now when she grows up, and what are all the kids of Minnesota. Will we have the infrastructure to attract jobs? Time. All these things are all these things we talk about. All of us want to do wonderful things for the state of Minnesota. We just differ in how we do it. I think I'm the one who can do it for us.
You know, I've been campaigning this whole time, knocking on doors as a fresh voice. I think people have seen enough of the problems, the dysfunction, and the polarization in St. Paul. We've seen one-party rule in St. Paul, and we've seen massive tax increases in waste, in misplaced priorities, like on the Senate office building. And I think that's a problem. I think that's something everyday folks in Burnsville and Savage are absolutely disgusted by. I have talked to people at the doors, and that's what I hear about more than anything else, is the Senate office building and the kind of message that that sends, that we're building a Taj Mahal for politicians instead of spending money on our roads and bridges and our schools and our kids. You could trust me with your tax dollars. I believe in an efficient, in an effective government, and a balanced government in St. Paul.
I'm Will Morgan. I'm a teacher at Burnsville High School. I've been a physics teacher there for more than 20 years. My professional experience tells me that if you set high standards for teachers and you set high standards for students, you get the best possible educational outcomes. That has really driven my role at the legislature in improving our schools and making sure we have high standards for students and teachers. You know, voters are going to have a choice this fall. They're going to have a choice between going back to the divisive gridlock of the past or moving forward with the progress we've made the last 2 years. We are working to close the achievement gap. We funded all-day kindergarten. We've frozen tuition, and we want to do it some more. We provided more than 2 million Minnesotans with tax cuts. We've balanced the budget. It is structurally balanced for the first time in recent memory, and we've got a good thing going. So I hope you'll support me and my efforts to work together with people on both sides of the aisle. I've heard people up here talk about one-party rule. Almost 95% of the bills we passed into law these last 2 years had bipartisan support. That's when Minnesota works best, when we listen and work together, and I hope to go back to the Capitol to continue to do more of that.
Well, thank you to the Burnsville Chamber for providing this forum and the City of Burnsville for hosting. I'm a mom, I'm a small business owner, and I'm a lifelong Minnesotan who really cares about our state. I believe that we have better outcomes when all viewpoints are taken into consideration, and if you look at the Minnesota Chamber voting record, it was not bipartisan at all. The Senate's not up for re-election this year, so the only way to truly bring balance is to have control at the House with the Republican Party, and we can provide all voices so we have better outcomes. We've heard some of the issues that have really negatively impacted our business community, and we're all connected. And that's why it's so important that we make sure our legislators understand the big picture. The solutions cannot always be taxes and spending. So we want an effective and efficient government, excellent schools, and healthcare that's affordable, that works, and promote the quality of life that we all expect. I ask for your support and vote on November 4th for Roz Peterson.
I'm Sandra Mason, and I am running for 51A, and I would sincerely appreciate your support. Again, this past 2 years we have accomplished a lot. We have, as Will has already said, we have a fiscally responsible budget. Minnesota is doing well in virtually all respects, and that to me means a whole lot. And I cannot tell you, I've done a lot in this community. I've served on the Eagan City Council, and actually I was also on the Eagan Parks Committee. Before that, I've served on numerous school committees as well. So my community is important to me, and providing the best I can for my family and friends is the reason I do what I do. So again, I truly appreciate your support and vote on November 4th.
I'm running because I believe government works better when citizens are representing us and not career politicians. In 1998, I was a brand new college graduate, and I had gotten my first real job, still living at home. And I decided that I would check out my local BPOU and find out what this grassroots political organizing business was all about. It was the first year that Tim Wilkin was running for state representative. His opponent that year was Sandra Mason. I am running because I believe in the citizen legislator. I want to bring my real life experiences as a mom and a healthcare professional so I can best serve the people of this community. And I would love your vote on November 4th.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. This concludes our program. Thank you to the candidates, and thank you to Dakota Electric for being a sponsor this afternoon.